The sky over the Wyoming range had a way of changing its mind without warning. One moment it stretched wide and pale, like an open plain laid on its side. The next, it folded itself into dark, churning layers that swallowed the sun. Caleb Thorne knew the signs well. He'd spent enough years on horseback, riding fence lines and herding through winter squalls, to read the sky the way other men read ledgers. And today, every sign pointed to trouble. As he guided his buckskin gelding along the narrow trail back toward Thorn Creek Ranch, the wind began its slow rise, a low whistle at first, then a steady push against his back, like a giant hand urging him to hurry. Snow flurries drifted in from the north, sparse and delicate, but building. Caleb pulled his collar higher. He'd been planning on making it home before dusk, but the mountains had decided dusk would come early. The land stretched around him in its winter bones. Sagebrush dusted white, distant pines clumped like dark sentinels, and the long creek bed snaking between hills already turning to ice. His saddlebags carried flour, coffee, a new length of rope, and a packet of medicine he didn't particularly need, but bought anyway, old habits from years when he had someone to use it on. He tried not to think about Mary. That kind of thinking only made a man colder. As the storm thickened, Caleb urged the gelding into a faster trot. It wasn't a fear of the weather. Winter storms were simply part of life, but something about this one felt heavier, meaner. The kind that turned travel dangerous and made even strong men foolish. A sharp gust kicked up, swirling snow into his eyes. Caleb squinted and reined in slightly. That was when he saw it or thought he did. Movement. Not the jittery flicker of snow, not the swaying of brush under wind. Something else, a shape. Small, lurching, and barely visible near the old wire fence that marked the outer edge of his land. His horse tossed his head, uneasy. Caleb slowed to a stop. For a moment, the storm swallowed everything in white. But then something stumbled again. Two somethings? He couldn't be sure. A prickle ran up his spine. Folks didn't wander this far out unless they had no choice. And in weather like this, no choice usually meant trouble, danger, desperation, or both. "Easy, boy," Caleb murmured, patting the gelding's neck. He dismounted, boots crunching into the hardening snow. The wind slapped his coat open, cold knifing through the fabric as he trudged toward the fence line. The shapes clarified slowly, first as lumps in the snow, then as the curled, huddled outlines of people. A grown woman, kneeling. And a child, maybe 10, maybe younger, slumped against her side. Caleb's breath stalled. They were barely moving. The woman lifted her head at the sound of his steps, her face pale beneath a layer of frost. Her hair dark, tangled, and stiffened with ice clung to her cheeks. She tried to stand but swayed, bracing one hand on the fence post. "Please," she managed, her voice almost swallowed by the wind. Caleb's heartbeat thudded hard, instinct kicking in before thought. No one survived long in a Wyoming blizzard exposed like this. Whoever they were, whatever their story, it didn't matter in this moment. They were freezing to death. He took off his heavy sheepskin coat without a word. The cold hit him like a hammer, but he pushed through it, striding the last few steps and throwing the coat over both strangers, pulling it firm around their shaking shoulders. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady though the wind howled. "Get up if you can. Both of you." He bent, lifting the boy with surprising ease. "Get in the house," he said, bracing the woman with his free arm. "You're turning blue," and the storm closed in around them. The woman's legs nearly buckled as Caleb helped her stand. She seemed to muster strength from some last, hidden reserve desperation, he figured, and pushed herself upright with a trembling grunt. Her eyes were wide and dark, glassy with cold and fear. The boy in Caleb's arms was icy from head to toe, his small hands curled into fists against the cold. Caleb felt a jolt of alarm. He'd seen men lose fingers in weather half this fierce. "We're almost there," Caleb said, though the ranch house was still a good 100 yards away. blurred behind the curtain of wind-driven snow. He shifted the boy's weight and guided the woman toward his horse. The gelding stomped and blew steam from his nostrils, unhappy about the storm and the unexpected burden. Caleb touched his neck reassuringly. "Easy, Jasper. We'll get inside soon." He lifted the boy higher and secured him in the saddle, steadying his limp body. The woman reached for the horse's mane, her fingers barely responsive, and Caleb boosted her up behind the boy, careful not to jostle either of them too harshly. She wrapped one arm around the child, the other gripping the saddle horn as though it were the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. "Hold tight," Caleb instructed. "I'll walk beside you." She nodded weakly, her lips too numb for words. Her breath came out in thin wisps that disappeared immediately into the storm. Caleb grasped the gelding's reins and began the slow, trudging walk toward the house. The wind was at their backs now, pushing them forward, but threatening to knock the woman clean off the saddle each time it gusted. He kept a hand braced on her leg, steadying her when he felt her sway. Twice she nearly slid sideways, but each time she managed to cling back into place, tightening her hold on the boy. Caleb could feel her fear radiating through the storm. Not just fear of the cold, something else, something deeper. As they crept through the rising drifts, he stole glances at her face blue-tinged lips, frost clinging to her lashes, cheeks raw with windburn. But beneath all that, she had the look of someone who had been running long before the weather turned against her. They reached the porch steps at last. The house loomed sturdily against the storm-weather-beaten wood sunk deep into the earth, windows shuttered tight, smoke curling from the chimney. A small mercy. The fire he'd banked earlier was still burning. Caleb helped the woman dismount, catching her when her knees gave out. She clung to his arm with surprising strength, as though releasing it would undo all the ground they'd gained. "I've got you," he assured her. He scooped the boy from the saddle, his skin disturbingly cold, and hurried them up the porch steps. Snow whipped around them, coating everything in white. He kicked the door open with his boot. Warmth poured out in a wave, the smell of pine wood, the crackle of fire, the blessed relief of shelter. The woman gasped at the sudden temperature change, pressing a hand to her chest as though the warmth itself hurt. "Inside," Caleb said again, ushering them in before the wind slammed the door against the wall. He shut it quickly, locking out the storm but not the tension twisting in his gut. The boy's head lolled against his shoulder. Caleb moved immediately toward the hearth, laying the child on a fur rug close enough to feel heat, but not so close as to burn frostbitten skin. He grabbed blankets from the nearby trunk and draped them over the boy, rubbing his arms briskly to bring circulation back. The woman hovered nearby, unsteady on her feet. Caleb took off his hat and tossed it aside, then turned to her. "What happened to you?" he asked. Her eyes flicked to the window toward the whiteout beyond. We didn't mean to come this far," she whispered. "But we had no other choice," and in her trembling voice, Caleb heard a story deeper and far more dangerous than a broken wagon in bad weather. Caleb had seen cold do terrible things to a body turned skin gray, steal breath, make even the strongest hands useless. But the woman standing in front of him looked past cold. She looked spent, as if she'd given every last bit of herself just to keep moving. Her lips were tinged purple. Her fingertips, poking out from torn gloves, were a sickly pale. The boy on the floor shivered violently under the blankets, his small face pinched tight with pain. Caleb tossed another log onto the fire, sparks leaping upward. The heat grew stronger, pushing back the chill in the room. Still, the woman didn't step closer. She stood near the door, the edges of his coat drooping around her thin frame like it weighed as much as she did. "You're freezing," Caleb said, frowning. "Come closer to the fire before you pass out." She didn't move. He straightened, sensing something brittle and fragile in the air. Folks who were scared behaved strangely. He'd seen it in skittish cattle, in wounded horses, in men on the brink. This woman had that same wild, ready-to-bolt look. Caleb softened his voice. Ma'am, you're turning blue. She blinked, touched her cheek as if only now realizing it, and swayed. Caleb stepped forward just in time to catch her elbow. Easy, he murmured. You're safe now. At the word safe, her whole body tensed. Caleb felt it immediately. Her breath hitched. Her eyes darted to the window again, scanning the white blur outside as though expecting shadows to emerge from it. Safe wasn't a word she believed. Sit, Caleb urged. He guided her toward a chair near the hearth. She sank into it reluctantly, clutching the coat around herself. The firelight cast a warm glow across her face, revealing the exhaustion etched deep into every line. He crouched down to check the boy again. The child's shivering had changed, still intense, but more responsive. That was good. Too much stillness and cold weather meant danger. Caleb adjusted the blankets and looked up at the woman. "How long were you out there?" he asked. She rubbed her hands together, her voice rasping. "Since morning, longer maybe." I'm not sure." The panic beneath her words was unmistakable. Caleb kept his expression steady. "Your wagon break?" She hesitated. "Yes. No, it doesn't matter. We were trying to reach the road. I thought it would be closer." She wasn't lying, not exactly. But she wasn't telling him the truth either. Caleb had learned to read people after years of ranch trading and cattle markets. Truth had a rhythm. What she said didn't have it, but he didn't push. Not yet. He stood and grabbed a kettle, filling it with snow from the bowl by the door and setting it to melt over the fire. The sharp hiss of steam filled the room. The woman watched him with wary eyes. "What's your name?" Caleb asked. "Elena." She swallowed with difficulty. "Elena Ward. And the boy?" "My brother, Daniel." Caleb nodded slowly. Brother, not son. Something eased inside him, though he wasn't sure why. "You both need warm food, dry clothes, and rest," he said. "We'll get you sorted." Her eyes flickered again toward the storm. We won't trouble you for long." Caleb almost snorted. "Trouble me?" "Ma'am, if I left you out there 10 more minutes, you'd be—" He stopped himself. No use painting grim pictures. Elena lowered her gaze, her hands twisting in the coat fabric. "You didn't have to help," she whispered. "Most men wouldn't." Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. "Maybe they wouldn't, but I'm not most men." Their eyes met hers, full of fear she couldn't hide, his filled with a steady, unspoken promise. Outside, the storm howled against the windows. Inside, for the first time in who knew how long, Elena and Daniel had a fighting chance. But Caleb could already sense it. This wasn't just a rescue. This was the beginning of something far more complicated. The storm rattled the windows hard enough to make the panes tremble, but inside the ranch house a different kind of tension simmered, quiet, sharp, and fragile as glass. The fire cracked and popped, throwing shadows across the walls. Caleb moved with calm purpose around the hearth, checking the kettle, adjusting blankets around Daniel, laying out a stack of thick quilts pulled from the cedar chest. But his attention kept drifting back to Elena. She sat stiffly in the chair, Caleb's coat wrapped around her like armor. Her wet skirts steamed near the heat, letting off the faint smell of frost and river water. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, knuckles white. Her whole posture reminded Caleb of a cornered mar too tired to kick, but far from trusting the hand reaching toward her. "You're gonna need dry clothes," Caleb said at last, rummaging in a trunk. "You're small enough that some of Mary's old things might fit." He regretted the slip the moment the name left his mouth. Elena's eyes lifted. Mary? Wife. The word tasted distant, like a memory spoken aloud by mistake. She passed a few years back. Something softened in Elena's face, sympathy, maybe, but it vanished quickly, replaced by the guarded stillness she kept returning to. Caleb found a wool dress, a long linen shift, and a knitted shawl. He laid them on the table beside her. "You can change in the bedroom there." He jerked his chin toward the closed door. "There's a stove." "I'll get it lit." "No, I can manage." she said quickly, rising on unsteady legs. Her urgency caught him off guard. She swayed, and he reached out to steady her, but she flinched back, gripping the chair until her breath evened. He stepped away slowly. "Suit yourself, but take the clothes. You'll warm faster." She gathered them up, nodding her thanks without meeting his eyes, then slipped into the bedroom and shut the door tight. Caleb exhaled hard. Suspicious wasn't a strong enough word for her. She acted like she expected danger in every shadow. And the way she kept glancing toward the windows. It wasn't the storm she feared. Caleb knew fear when he saw it, but this was different. This was someone hunted. He crouched beside Daniel again. The boy's shivers were easing, and a bit of color had returned to his cheeks. "You're gonna be all right, kid," Caleb murmured. The boy blinked up at him. His voice was small, hoarse. Is she okay?" Caleb nodded. "She's warming up. She'd be fine." Daniel's eyes watered with relief. We thought we wouldn't make it." Caleb didn't doubt it. "Best you're here now. Storm like this'll close the trail by sundown." Daniel swallowed, gaze drifting to the bedroom door. "We were trying to get away." Caleb's hand stilled on the blanket. "Away from what?" Before the boy could answer, the latch clicked. Elena stepped out wearing Mary's dress loose at the shoulders, a size too big, but warm and clean. Her damp hair fell over her shoulders, the ends curling from the heat. For a moment, the room felt strangely still. Elena caught Caleb looking and held herself a little straighter, as if bracing for judgment. "It fits," Caleb said simply. She nodded. "Thank you." But that fragile calm lasted only seconds. Her gaze darted toward the nearest window, the same quick, fearful flicker he'd noticed before. Caleb's brow furrowed. "If someone's looking for you," he said quietly, "you'd better tell me." Her breath shook. Her fingers curled into the shawl. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "Not yet," she whispered. "Please, just not yet." And though Caleb didn't understand it, something in her voice, thin, desperate, honest, stopped him from pressing further. For now, nightfall came early beneath the weight of the storm. The windows darkened until they reflected only the fire's glow, and the wind battered the house in long, angry moans. Inside, the air was thick with warmth, but thicker still with unspoken truths. Caleb didn't push not yet, but the silence between him and Elena was like a stretched rope, ready to snap at the slightest tug. Daniel had drifted into an uneasy sleep, curled near the hearth with the quilts bundled tight around him. Caleb checked his pulse, his breathing, the color of his fingers. Better. Much better. Kids were tough. They bounced back when given a fighting chance. Elena watched every movement Caleb made, her hands twisting in the shawl as though worried she would unravel if she let go. "You got any food preferences?" he asked gently, not wanting to frighten her more. "I can make stew, or biscuits, or—" "Anything is fine," she said quickly. "We haven't eaten since yesterday morning." That hit Caleb harder than he expected. Yesterday morning? In this cold? Impossibly dangerous. He stirred the pot of stew simmering over the fire, her words echoing in his head. Starving, frozen, terrified. Nobody ends up in those conditions without reason. He ladled stew into 2 bowls. When he handed one to her, she hesitated again, just like she had with the clothes, as if taking anything from him was a risk. Slowly, she accepted the bowl, her hands trembling around it. She took a cautious sip, then another, then another. For a moment, the fear slipped away, replaced by desperate hunger. Caleb pretended not to notice. Dignity was a fragile thing. "You treat your brother well," he said quietly. Her shoulders stiffened. She didn't look up. "He's all I have," she murmured. "I can't let anything happen to him." Caleb waited. Sometimes silence brought out the truth better than questions. Elena set the bowl down, her breath unsteady. "We didn't just wander off the road," she whispered. "We didn't just have an accident either." Caleb felt it not surprise, but confirmation. The pieces were sliding into place. Elena's fingers tightened around the shawl. We were running. From who? Caleb's voice was calm, steady. A rancher's voice. A man who had pulled frightened animals out of traps and soothed bucking horses. But the question cut through Elena like a blade. She flinched. Our guardian, she said finally. A man named Bram Sloan. Caleb's jaw clenched. Sloan. He didn't know the name personally, but he knew the type. The West had plenty of men like that, men who believed land and people both could be bought and claimed like livestock. He wasn't our kin, Elena continued. Just a distant cousin of my father. When my parents died, he took us in. At first, I thought he meant to help us. Then I saw what he wanted. Her voice cracked. Caleb didn't move, didn't speak. He waited. He planned to sell our land back east. Then he... She swallowed hard, her hands beginning to shake. He tried to force me into a marriage contract with a man he owed money to. Daniel overheard him. We packed what we could and fled before dawn. A heavy silence settled. Caleb's grip tightened around his own bowl. Why didn't you go to the law? We tried, Elena whispered. The sheriff in the last town was friends with Sloan. They said a guardian's word stands. That I had no right to run. That Daniel would be taken from me. She lifted her eyes, then dark, shining, full of fear that cut Caleb straight through. So we left, she finished. We thought if we could reach the main road, we'd find a town farther west someplace Sloan couldn't reach. But the storm came too fast. The wagon wheels froze. One broke. We walked until we couldn't walk anymore. Caleb exhaled slowly. Now he understood the glances at the windows. The flinching. The guarded stillness. These weren't strangers caught in a storm. They were fugitives, victims, survivors. Miss Ward, he said quietly, you're safe here. I won't hand you over. Not to him. Not to anybody. Her breath shuddered out of her. Relief flickered across her face, but only for a heartbeat. Then she whispered the words that settled deep into Caleb's bones. He'll come for us. And Caleb knew she was right. The fire burned low, casting a warm amber glow across the room, but Caleb felt a cold stir inside him that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Elena's words replayed in his mind, he'll come for us. He believed her. Every instinct in him, honed by years on the frontier, told him Sloan wasn't the type to let go of what he thought he owned. Caleb had known men like that. Men who took instead of earned. Men who pushed until someone broke. The West grew plenty of them, and too few who stood in their way. He leaned back against the stone hearth, watching Elena gently stroke Daniel's hair as the boy slept. Her movements were soft, protective, practiced. She wasn't just a sister, she'd been a mother in all but name. And she'd carried that boy through miles of white hell just to keep him safe. That kind of courage didn't come from nowhere. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, an old place creaking open, a place he'd sworn he'd boarded shut. Elena sensed his eyes on her and lifted her head. Her expression was wary, cautious, yet not as tightly drawn as before. Some of her fear had drained away, replaced by exhaustion and a fragile trust she was still fighting to accept. You must think me a fool, she murmured, voice small in the crackling quiet. Running into a storm like that. Dragging Daniel through it. I should have known better. Caleb shook his head. You did what you had to do. Elena lowered her gaze. You say that so easily. It's the truth. She hesitated, searching his face. Do you have children, Mr. Thorne? The question hit harder than he expected. Caleb inhaled slowly, eyes drifting to the mantel where a small wooden carving sat, one he thought he tucked out of sight. A tiny horse, worn smooth by years of handling. No, he said softly. No children, but you had a wife. He nodded once, throat tightening. The storm outside seemed to fade a little, or maybe his thoughts drowned it out. Mary and I came out here when we were just 20, he began, surprised at himself for saying her name aloud. He rarely did any more. Built this place from scratch. It wasn't much back then, but she was proud of it. Proud of us. Alina listened with gentle attentiveness, her hand stilling in Daniel's hair. She got sick one winter, Caleb continued. Real bad fever. By the time the doctor made it out from Jackson, it was too late. A quiet fell over the room. Not uncomfortable somber, like the hush after a prayer. I'm sorry, Elena whispered. Caleb cleared his throat, pushing past the old ache. I buried her on the hill out back. After that, I kept mostly to myself. Easier that way. Easier, yes, but empty too. Helena's eyes softened. That must have been lonely. He almost smiled wry, reluctant. It was, still is some days. Her gaze drifted to the fire. I know something about loneliness. After my parents died, the house went quiet, too quiet. I used to talk to Daniel just to fill the emptiness. Caleb watched her then, really watched her. The strength that lived under all that fear. The tenderness she gave Daniel without hesitation. The grit it took to run from a man like Sloan with nothing but courage and a promise to protect her brother. You're strong, he said before he could stop himself. Elena blinked, startled. I don't feel strong. Funny thing about strength, Caleb said, voice low. It's usually the ones who don't feel it who carry the most. Her eyes glistened not with tears, exactly, but with a kind of weary gratitude. Outside, the wind howled like a beast pacing the walls. Inside, something softened between them, a small warmth, an unspoken understanding. Caleb didn't push it, didn't name it, but he felt it settle in his chest like an ember-catching flame. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But he knew this. He wasn't letting Sloan or anyone take these two back into the cold. Not while Caleb Thorne was breathing. The storm raged deep into the night, wind screaming around the eaves like some furious snow-blind ghost. But by morning the blizzard had quieted, not stopped, just changed, softer, more deceptive. Snow lay thick across the ground, smoothing the world into white silence. Caleb stood at the window, mug in hand, watching the landscape with the wary eye of a man who survived too many winters to trust the quiet. Storms could hide things, footprints, riders, trouble. Behind him, Elena moved around the kitchen with slow, careful motions, still sore from the cold, still tired, still wrestling with the fear she tried so hard to keep tamped down. Daniel, wrapped in a quilt, sat at the kitchen table chewing on a biscuit with more enthusiasm than Caleb had seen since they arrived. For a brief moment, it almost felt peaceful. "You're sure we're not imposing?" Elena asked, her voice breaking the hush. Caleb turned from the window. "For the last time, you're not. You're safe here." She tried to smile, but it wavered at the edges. "Safe," she repeated softly, as if tasting the word, unsure whether to believe it. Caleb didn't press. She'd believe it when she was ready. He went back to scanning the land. Fresh snow meant clearer tracks, but it also meant riders could move quietly. And the storm had been loud enough the night before to cover just about anything. Something tugged at his instincts. A faint unease. A shift in the air. The kind of feeling that made a man reach for his rifle before he knew why. He set down his mug. "Stay inside," he said suddenly. Elena froze mid-step, alarm flashing across her face. "What is it?" Caleb listened. The world outside was too still. No birds, no wind, no settling noises from the melting snow. Just silence, heavy and wrong. He grabbed his coat from the peg by the door. "Probably nothing," he said, though his voice stayed low, taut. "Just want to check the barn, make sure the roof held." Elena looked unconvinced, but she said nothing when he stepped outside. The cold hit him like a slap. Caleb crunched through the snow toward the barn, every step slow, deliberate. His eyes swept the horizon. Nothing. He made it halfway across the yard before he saw it. Tracks? Not his. Not from his horse. Fresh. Deep. Leading up from the creek bed and leading toward the house. Caleb's blood turned to ice colder than the snow beneath his boots. He followed the nearest print, kneeling to brush away loose snow. The hoof mark was sharp-edged recent. Maybe an hour old, maybe less. He scanned farther. 4 riders, heavy horses, coming from the south. He didn't need a name to know who they were. He didn't waste another second. Caleb sprinted back to the house, slamming the door behind him. Elena jumped, Daniel dropping crumbs across the table. "What happened?" she whispered. Caleb strode to the gun rack, grabbing his Winchester rifle and checking the chamber with practiced speed. "Riders," he said. 4 of them. Coming up from the creek. Elena's face drained of color. "No?" Her hand covered her mouth. "He found us." Caleb didn't sugarcoat it. "Looks that way." "Caleb." Her voice shook. "You don't know what Sloan is capable of." "Yes," Caleb said, loading a shell with a click that echoed through the room. "I think I do." Daniel moved closer to Elena, clutching her skirt. Caleb's gaze hardened. "Listen to me carefully. No matter what you hear, you and Daniel stay away from the windows. Stay behind the kitchen wall, low to the ground." "Caleb, we never meant for this to be your fight." "Well," he interrupted, stepping toward the door, rifle in hand. "It is now." A sudden knock, sharp, commanding, struck the front door like a hammer. Elena flinched violently. Caleb's voice dropped to a growl. "Get down." "Both of you." Daniel clung tighter. Elena's breath trembled as she pulled him with her. Another knock, harder, followed by a man's voice, smooth, confident, and full of ownership. "Open up, Thorne. We're here for what belongs to us." Caleb's jaw clenched. He stepped between the door and the people hiding behind him, and the real storm finally arrived. The knock thundered again, 3 slow, deliberate raps that made the wood shudder in its frame. Caleb planted his boots squarely and tightened his grip on the Winchester. Behind him, he heard Elena suck in a trembling breath and Daniel softly whimper, muffled against her skirt. The voice on the other side of the door came again, smooth as polished brass. "Caleb Thorne, open up." No need for trouble. Caleb didn't move. Instead, he stepped sideways to the narrow window beside the door and lifted the curtain just enough to see. 4 riders, just as he'd counted. Hard-eyed men in dark coats, horses steaming in the cold. And at their front sat a man with a fox-colored mustache and a posture that bled arrogance. Sloan. Caleb didn't need to hear his name to know it. He recognized the type instantly, a man who believed the world bent for him, that laws were tools and people were property. Caleb let the curtain fall. "Elena," he whispered, "take Daniel and get behind the stove. Stay low. Don't come out unless I call you." She hesitated only a second before gathering Daniel in her arms and crouching behind the thick iron stove, hidden by the angle of the walls. Her eyes locked on Caleb's fear, pleading with him not to do something reckless. Too late for that. Caleb stepped to the door but kept it closed. "State your business." A chuckle drifted through the wood, casual, self-assured. "You know damn well what we're here for. A woman and a boy came through here. They belong to me." Caleb's jaw flexed. "No person belongs to anyone." Sloane's tone sharpened. "I'm their legal guardian. They ran off. I'm entitled to bring them home." Caleb's fingers curled tighter around the Winchester. "Funny, they didn't mention anything about wanting to go back." A heavy pause. Then the menace seeped through Sloane's voice like poison. "That girl is under my ward. You are interfering with lawful matters, Thorne. That's a crime." Caleb barked a humorless laugh. "Since when do criminals get to lecture me about the law?" Silence outside, the dangerous kind where anger coils before it strikes. "Open the door," Sloane said, now dropping all the polite pretense, "or my men and I will come in." Caleb's voice dropped to a steady, cold warning. "You take 1 step into my house and I'll put you in the snow before you can blink." Elena squeezed Daniel tight at the words, her eyes fixed on Caleb with terrified hope. Sloane's reply came lower, colder. You think you can stand against 4 armed men alone? Caleb didn't hesitate. I've stood against worse. That earned a growl, then a fast thump against the door. Someone testing its strength. Caleb stepped back, lifting his rifle to his shoulder. Last warning, he said. You're trespassing. Outside, a murmur. Then Sloane's voice again, now sharp and impatient. Break it down. Boots shifted. Wood splintered. A body slammed against the door, making the hinges shriek. Daniel whimpered. Elena pressed a shaking hand over his mouth. Caleb took a slow breath. He didn't fire. Not yet. A gunshot would start a war outright, something he'd do only if forced. Instead, he backed toward the rear of the room, moving to the window facing the yard. He cracked it open. The cold rushed in like a slap. He aimed high, not at the men, but at the sky above them, and pulled the trigger. The rifle roared. A blast of snow from the roof exploded downward, startling the horses and men alike. One horse reared. Another spun sideways, tossing a rider into a drift. The others swore and scrambled. Caleb shouted through the window. That was a warning shot. You want the next one closer? Sloane steadied his mount, face twisted with fury. This isn't over, Thorne, he snarled. You can't hide them forever. Caleb met his glare without blinking. Watch me. Sloane yanked his horse around. The riders regrouped, shaken but not gone. They retreated toward the tree line, disappearing into the storm's fading white. Caleb closed the window with a sharp breath, lowered the rifle, and turned. Elena stared at him, eyes wide, tears trembling, relief and terror tangled together. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. Caleb stepped toward her, his voice low and fierce. Yes, he said. I did, because now the fight was his. The wind had shifted, carrying the scent of pine and snow over the open yard. The storm had faded to a whisper, but the tracks in the drifts betrayed the riders' presence. 4 men, armed and hell-bent on reclaiming what they thought was theirs. Caleb crouched by the window, rifle steady, eyes scanning the tree line. He could hear the faint crunch of snow under hooves as Sloane and his men circled, testing, probing, waiting for an opening. Inside, Elena clutched Daniel to her chest. Her small frame shook, though it wasn't entirely from cold. She pressed her forehead against his hair and whispered reassurances she didn't fully believe, glancing to Caleb for strength she wasn't sure he could provide. Stay low, Caleb said softly. Don't make a sound unless I tell you. Outside, Sloane's voice cut through the frozen air, calm but filled with authority. Caleb Thorne, open up. It'll be easier if you surrender them peacefully. Caleb exhaled slowly, the cold air stinging his lungs. I don't negotiate with thieves, he muttered under his breath. He moved quickly to the back door, which led to a narrow ravine that sloped down the hill behind the house. The snow-covered ground was treacherous, but Caleb knew every inch. The ravine provided a hidden path, a natural trap if he used it wisely. He threw a glance over his shoulder at Elena and Daniel. Stay put. I'm going to draw them in. Elena's eyes widened, terror surfacing again. You can't. There's 4 of them. You'll be killed. Caleb's jaw tightened. Better me than them taking you. He slipped outside through the back, the snow crunching under his boots, and moved silently toward the ravine. Using the trees and natural dips in the land, he positioned himself to fire from a concealed spot while forcing the riders down the slope where the snow would slow them. His plan relied not on strength alone, but on his knowledge of the land a weapon few could match. The first horse came into sight, followed by the second. Caleb fired a warning shot over their heads, the crack echoing through the valley. Horses skidded, sliding in the deep snow. One rider cursed, struggling to keep balance, while another nearly tumbled into the drift. Sloane, growing impatient, barked orders, but the snow and Caleb's precision kept them disoriented. Every shot Caleb fired was carefully aimed not to injure. He didn't want bloodshed if he could avoid it, but to intimidate, unbalancing the men and scattering their formation. The ravine funneled the riders into a narrow channel. Caleb had cut down a few fallen branches earlier, creating hidden obstacles. Horses stumbled. The men cursed and shouted. One horse went down completely, tossing its rider into the snow. Caleb waited, letting the natural chaos work for him. By the time the last rider reached the narrowest point, Caleb emerged from cover with a firm voice. Turn back now. Leave this place, or I'll make sure none of you ride out alive. Sloane's eyes blazed with rage, but the logic was undeniable. They were trapped, outnumbered by circumstance, and outmaneuvered by a man who knew the land better than they could imagine. Slowly, deliberately, Sloane signaled retreat. The riders pulled their horses back, cursing and shaking fists, but retreating nonetheless. Caleb stayed crouched until the last of them disappeared into the tree line. Only when the sound of hooves faded completely did he exhale, shoulders relaxing for the first time in hours. He trudged back to the house, boots sinking into the soft snow, his rifle still in hand. Inside, Elena and Daniel waited, wide-eyed but safe. Daniel ran to him, gripping his coat. "You did it," he exclaimed. Caleb knelt, ruffling the boy's hair. "They're gone." For now. Elena's hands clutched his sleeve, her relief palpable. I didn't think anyone could stop them." Caleb looked at her, his expression softening, but his eyes stayed wary. Sometimes knowing the land, knowing yourself, and not backing down is enough. Outside, the snow lay untouched, serene and deceptive. Inside, the warmth of the fire mirrored the fragile calm between them. But Caleb knew the fight wasn't over. Sloane would come back sooner or later. For now, though, they had survived. And that was all that mattered. The sun broke over the ridge late that morning, painting the snow in streaks of gold and pink. The storm had passed, leaving the world quiet and sparkling as if it had been scrubbed clean. Caleb stood at the porch, boots crunching through the fresh snow, taking in the sight. The air smelled of pine and earth, crisp and real. For the first time in days, there was no pressing fear, no shadowed presence. Only light and the fragile promise of safety. Behind him, the house felt alive again. Daniel banged a spoon against a bowl, claiming breakfast, and Elena moved about the kitchen with cautious energy, putting on an air of calm that belied the tension in her shoulders. She caught Caleb's eye across the room and offered a small, genuine smile, the first he'd seen since she arrived. "You should eat," he said softly, nodding toward the table. "You've earned it." She shook her head. "I'm not very hungry." But she carried a warmth in her voice now, one that hadn't been there before. The storm had left more than snow in its wake. It had left relief, gratitude, and something else, something Caleb didn't name aloud. Hope. Daniel, as if sensing the change, hopped down from his chair and ran to the porch, pointing to the distant hills. "Look. No tracks. They're really gone." Caleb ruffled his hair and chuckled softly. "For now, yes." Elena set the bowls on the table and joined him outside, wrapping herself in Caleb's sheepskin coat again. The world looked almost unreal sparkling, peaceful, but both of them knew better. Sloane could come again, but for the moment, they were free. "You've done more than I can thank you for," Elena said, her voice low. "I don't know how to repay you." Caleb shook his head. "No repayment needed. You and Daniel are safe. That's enough." She looked down at Daniel, and for a moment, her expression softened entirely. "We have nowhere else to go," she admitted. Caleb's gaze drifted to the snow-covered hills, then back to them. He didn't hesitate. "Then stay," he said simply. "I've lived alone long enough. The house, the land, could use a bit of life again. You and Daniel, you'll have a place here?" Her eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I am about winter storms," Caleb replied, his voice quiet but steady. For the first time, Elena allowed herself to believe it. Relief washed over her. melting away the tension she had carried for weeks. Daniel cheered softly, spinning in the snow, snowflakes sticking to his hair, laughing in a way that lifted Caleb's heart more than any meal or fire ever could. The three of them went back inside, shutting the door to the cold world outside. Caleb set fresh logs on the fire while Elena tucked Daniel into a chair near the hearth, blankets snug around him. The house felt warmer, brighter, full of life. For the first time in a long while, Caleb could imagine a life beyond lonely days and cold nights. Sitting across from him, Elena smiled, and it wasn't the wary, guarded smile of before. It was tentative, yes, but genuine. There was gratitude and something else simmering underneath, trust. Caleb thought of Mary, of the life he had lost, and realized he hadn't known peace like this in years. Not just safety, but the quiet hope that comes from protecting someone, from being needed, from finally choosing to open his heart again. Outside, the snow glittered under the sun. Inside, the fire crackled. And for Caleb Thorne, Elena Ward, and young Daniel, the storm had passed. But the warmth it left behind, friendship, trust, and the beginnings of family, promised something even stronger, a life rebuilt together on the high Wyoming plains. Caleb lifted his mug, glancing at them both. "To new beginnings," he said. Elena smiled, Daniel beamed, and the sound of laughter and warmth filled the house. The West was still wild, still dangerous. Sloan might return. But for now, in the quiet after the storm, they had found something worth holding on to each other. And that was more than enough.